The seventh day. The continual struggle that mankind has had for perfection has now reached its glorious conclusion, and man can lose himself in heaven above. At last, all the striving can cease, and man is once more united with the divinity from which he issued and to which he has for so long struggled to return. Once more, God is in man, and man in God. And at last, to use a Buddhist analogy, the dewdrop slips into the shining sea. This is the seventh day, the day of rest, in which God ceased from all the work he has set himself to do. Genesis 2:3. For the Messianic plan, having reached the topmost of the five construction chambers, and thus the last of the seven Messianic ages is complete. 7 ages, 7 days. This very week around which the life of our society revolves seems, in short, to have been devised as a direct symbolic memorialization of the Messianic plan and all the stages it has gone through to reach its finality. This is a plan which, as the week's number of days suggests, has as its prime object the spiritual perfecting of man. What is the correlation with the olive branch and the number 7? And how does it correlate with the Bible and the pyramid? 7 species, new earth, post-event, harvest, 7 ages. 69, 1-3. Save me, O God, for the waters have risen up to my neck. I sink in muddy depths and have no foothold. I am swept into deep water, and the flood carries me away. I am wearied with crying out. My throat is sore. My eyes grow dim as I wait for God to help me. The fall of man, then, may well have been a voluntary act, a kind of induced psychic mutation, undertaken with the noblest of intentions, but it had the most disastrous results, and it is to this event that the Adam and Eve story may obliquely refer. 2. Fortunately for man, there are, as the psalmist realized, other more powerful spiritual influences in the universe, and in response to his cries for help, the Messianic rescue plan was instituted by the spiritual world. As part of it, the man Jesus showed how the attempted rescue mission could be achieved, despite apparent physical death, without loss of spiritual immortality, a demonstration which involved allowing himself, from the moment of his baptism, to be taken over by a further emanation from the world of pure spirit, known by some as the Holy Spirit. His return to earth as Messiah is destined to provide the final proof and culmination of the demonstration. Thanks to this spiritual intervention in man's affairs, one which clearly can come about only with the consent of man himself, the day will eventually come when man will at last be saved from the waters of mortality, along with a goodly proportion of the souls he himself had tried to save. The harvest may be great and the laborers few, but in the prophetic words of Psalm 126, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, a man may go out weeping, carrying his bag of seed, but he will come back with songs of joy, carrying home his sheaves. Let me read that one more time. The harvest may be great, and the laborers few, but in prophetic words of Psalm 126, a man may go out weeping, carrying his bag of seed, but he will come back with songs of joy, carrying home his sheaves. The story of Noah's flood. The familiar story of Genesis 6:8 starts amid an age of wickedness when, according to the biblical account, the sons of the gods had intercourse with the daughters of men, and the Nephilim, or giants, were on earth. Forewarned, because of his exceptional righteousness, of an impending world flood, Noah, in his 600th year, having built an ark of reeds to a divinely prescribed specification, enters it with his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, together with one pair of each species of living animal. Oddly enough, Noah seems to have disobeyed his instructions, which were to take with him 7 pairs of most of the species involved, but no matter. After the best part of 7 days, 40 days of rain begin, while vast subterranean waters also pour forth. And for 150 days the floodwaters rise, until the mountains are covered to the extent of 15 cubits, some 30 feet, if the measurement is meant to be taken seriously. After a further 150 days, the floodwaters have receded to the point where the ark is aground on a mountain in Ararat, and the first mountain tops are visible. Now Noah releases a raven, a bird commonly used in the ancient world for shore-sighting purposes. But the raven merely flies to and fro, an activity normally interpreted by mariners of old as an indication that they were at about the midpoint of their voyage, but nonetheless an odd activity when one considers that the mountaintops were allegedly already visible and before clear of the water. Excuse me. After 7 days, he released a dove, which promptly returns to the ark, being unable to find any spot dry enough to settle. Another unlikely story on the face of it. After another 7 days, he again releases the dove, and it again returns, this time bearing an olive branch. Finally, after a further 7 days, he releases the dove a third time, and this time it fails to return at all, whereupon Noah and his companions are at last ordered to disembark with their living cargo. And the divine command goes forth for all living things to be fruitful and increase, the language being reminiscent of the events of the 5th day of creation. See page 167. Moreover, Noah receives a divine promise that never again will all creatures be killed by any flood, and the promise is sealed with the heavenly sign of the rainbow. Analyzing the flood story. The story is, of course, full of inconsistencies, both of fact and figure. On the other hand, it is also full of symbolism, both factual and numerological. Once again, one suspects a typical explanatory myth, whatever is basis in historical fact. Whatever is basis in historical fact is being used as a vehicle for some much deeper message. The flood narrative itself is strongly reminiscent of the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, but the symbolism is equally strongly messianic. Excuse me. Indeed, Jesus of Nazareth himself seems explicitly to have acknowledged the story's messianic significance at Matthew 24:37-3. To start with, the word ark is generally used in the Bible to refer to a chest or coffer for keeping things safe or secret, principally in connection with the much later Ark of the Covenant. In fact, there is only one exception to the general interpretation, Noah's Ark itself, 4. But in this case, why suppose Noah's Ark to be an exception in the first place? Could we not, in other words, read Noah's entry into the ark with his flock in terms of the entry of the world's one righteous man and his followers into a place of safety? But safety from what? What is signified in this case by the all-engulfing waters? Once again, the obvious symbolism is of the water of the womb, 5, and thus of rebirth and human mortality. And human mortality. By extension, we may interpret it as also signifying human wickedness, with which indeed the story itself explicitly links it. That's the best I can do for this video. I hope you all enjoyed that one.